Welcome, I'm Dean Rotbart, host of Monday Morning Radio. It's my pleasure to be the moderator for this panel, The Physiology of Early Childhood Biking. The panel will discuss the physical development of toddlers and kindergartners, including balance, coordination, and muscle strength. It will also cover the benefits of exercise for children, cardiovascular, motor skills, skeletal development, and disease immunities. On this panel, we have 4 experts who I'll introduce momentarily. In addition, Dr. Amelia Monteiro, a pediatrician working for the Greater New Bedford Community Health Center in Massachusetts, will add her perspective as a clinician. Dr. Monteiro's interview was pre-recorded. Our first panelist is Dr. Ellen Anderson. She is Associate Professor at the Rutgers School of Health Professionals in New Jersey. Dr. Anderson, thank you for joining us on the panel.
It's my pleasure, Dean.
Okay, so I want to start by asking you about the science of supporting cardiovascular, muscular, and immunological benefits when it comes to early childhood exercise. Just how well established is that science?
The science is very well established. I think we can look to the physical activity guidelines for Americans. The Department of Health and Human Services created a compendium of information in which they looked at research across thousands of areas regarding physical activity. And they put together recommendations, and those recommendations have been updated in 2018 in their new report. And what's interesting in that new report is that it now extends to the evidence and the literature that we have for children as young as 3 years of age, and the benefits of physical activity for even that very younger cohort. So previously, the guidelines only went to ages 6 through 17, and then adults and older adults. And so therefore, there's been quite a robust review of the science regarding physical activity in that younger population. So for example, the recommendations are that children as young as 3 begin to have regular physical activity throughout the day. And that can be a range of low, moderate, or intense physical activity. Whereas older children, it's advised that they have 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity in order to get health benefits. And the health benefits that I'm talking about is improved bone health, beginning as early as 3 years of age, improved weight status, and then we see that there's changes and improvements in cardiorespiratory and muscular fitness. There's improvement in cardiometabolic, so if we think about blood sugar and diabetes. And what's also interesting in this new data that's been included in this report is evidence that physical activity will help brain function, it will help cognition. And then in some of the children in the middle age, let's say 9, 10, 11, 12, there's evidence that physical activity can have a reduction in risk for depression. And so what we know moving forward is that we want physical activity to begin very early and for it to be very frequent, preferably throughout the day.
Let me put you on the spot a little bit, and I'll ask you a question. If it is outside of your area of expertise, just punt. That's, football teams do it all the time. Is all physical activity for young children created equal? I know for adults, the answer is typically not. If you're an adult and you're trying to exercise, rowing or swimming offers different benefits, say, than walking or biking. How about at the younger age, at the kindergarten and earlier age?
Okay, so at the younger age, all activity is good activity. And that really comes from watching children when they play and the kind of play activities that they do. And so just through play, they're incorporating what would be considered great for cardiovascular pulmonary fitness. They're also doing strength. They're also doing bone development. When we look at the recommendations for 6 to 17, that's where we see that in that 60 minutes of vigorous activity, or I should say moderate to vigorous activity, where we think aerobic, the recommendations are also saying, and then out of that time over the course of the week, there should be 3 days of bone strengthening activities. So those weight bearing kind of activities. So now at 6 to 17, we begin to see a differentiation between the type of exercise.
Okay.
And in addition to that, there's recommendations for strengthening type, resistance type activities in that 6 to 17 age group.
Dr. Anderson, I'm going to come back to you a little bit later in this panel and ask you specifically what different physiological benefits there are from bicycling. We'll come back and talk about that. I want to go to Dr. Andrew Shim. Hello, Dr. Shim, how are you?
Good morning, Dean. Doing fine, thank you.
Good. You are professor of kinesiology and exercise science at the College of St. Mary. I would love to have a business card that said that on the business card. It sounds so impressive.
I don't really see it as impressive. I look at it as my next challenge because many people don't know that this is a all-women's institution. There are few of us men here. However, we accept the mission of the Catholic faith of promoting service and leadership for women.
Terrific, terrific. And I am sure your students, and you have some graduate students who've actually been working in this area. I'm sure they're fantastic. Talk a little bit about the research that you have been conducting into the benefits of bicycling generally. And I don't know whether you have focused on early childhood bicycling or not, but about some of the research you've been doing looking into bicycling, and tell us what prompted you to undertake the research in the first place.
That's a good question, and I'll be as brief as I can because I probably can go on for an hour on this topic. Originally, my main area is motor behavior, and I wanted specifically to look at the prevention of falls about 14, 15 years ago. And it was based upon some of my family members starting to fall as they got a little bit older, and looking at what some of the other universities have done. Long story short, looking at elderly adults and some of the stuff that we were trying to decipher if it was more situational versus predispositional, I got a phone call and followed up with an email through Strider International. And they said that they've noticed some of my work in the past and asked me if I work with children. And the answer was no, not in that capacity. And they asked me about my knowledge of pedalless bikes, which, Dean, I'll be honest with you, I mean, I've never seen them. I've never heard of them, even though when I finally did some of my homework, I never knew that the original bike was actually built without pedals back in the mid 1700s. And they asked me about the understanding of a relationship between my research department and maybe possibly studying these bicycles, especially with 3 to 5 year olds, because they were getting lots of testimonials from grandparents and parents saying that these bikes are fantastic. We feel they work, but then again, they had no clinical data. And I guess we were very fortunate that regardless of where we were with the ranking system, we were going to do it at no charge. Other universities would have charged for that. And we made it a top priority where I put a research team together, probably 5 grad students at the time, 20 undergraduate students, and we found a university daycare center that was going to be our experimental group. And we want to compare that to a control group of a Lutheran daycare center that was 2 miles down the road. And the Institutional Review Board was very gentle with looking over the application, and we were able to start within probably 2 months. And Strider was very generous in donating the bicycles, the helmets, the ramps. This was going to be a outdoor design where we were going to put an outdoor course with some uneven surface of grass and some bumpy type of terrain. And these children who we screened, who never had any kind of bicycle riding experience, were signed off by their parents to agree to a 4-week, 3 times per week for about 20 minutes, and saying if a repeated measure design, which means that every single week Dean, we put each child, may it be our control group or experimental group, on a computerized posturography plate, which is a force plate that is portable and connected to a laptop. And so it's very easy for us to bring this plate with us with a laptop to the daycare center as well as to the university childcare center and test every child on a regular basis every week for 4 weeks. And believe it or not, what we've seen is, and this is important of why we decided to go with a repeated measure design versus a pre-test, post-test design, is because you never know when someone's going to ask you, Dean, can you tell us when the improvements happened? And if I did a pre-test, post-test design, I really couldn't tell you. I can just tell you that, hey, improvements existed, but I can't tell you when. So to hopefully maybe prevent that type of criticism, we wanted to, which was very time consuming, spend the extra time, test each child every single week at the same time of the week, and make sure that it just wasn't something that just caused itself based upon other extraneous or outside variables. And to answer my original question was, we found during the second week that improvements in limit of stability scores actually improved. And when I say limit of stability, that's the ability for each child to actually lean either frontal or in the posterior plane, or either in the left or on the right sagittal plane. And it made total sense, Dean, because that's what they were doing on these bikes. Because when we put installed some of these very simple, easygoing ramps on the obstacle course, over a period of time, once they gained confidence, and of course, their central nervous system made the adaptations for them to actually have improvements of body control, they were able to put their feet up a little bit, and they would have to lean to one side to maintain some equilibrium. So it made total sense if we're looking at a 1963 theoretical concept of Franklin Henry.
Dr. Shim, you're right. We could spend more than an hour just on this. So I want to come back to you. I want to talk. So just quickly, when was that first research? What year was that first research done?
2012.
2012. So think about this. We'll come back around to you after we've talked to the other panelists, but tell us sort of how that research in 2012, what it also led to, because I know you're doing research not just on children, you're doing research on adults and other related motor development skills. So we'll come back to you, Dr. Shim, in just a few minutes. Our next panelist is Cindy Ireland. Cindy is a physical therapist. Cindy, I'm going to unmute you.
I got it.
There you go. Okay, hi, Cindy.
Hi.
With the Douglas and Sturgis, South Dakota school districts, how large is that school district?
Both of the Meade School District covers a large area. I want to say all the way from.
How many schools?
Well, there's 3 elementary schools in the Meade School District, and one broken up like through K through 3 and 4 and 5 in the Douglas School District.
And so do you rotate between the schools?
Yes.
Okay, good. So tell us what I would love to hear is about some of the work you're doing in schools and how you utilize exercise in general, and biking if you utilize specifically to help the children that you're seeing.
Well, I work with students birth to 21. Usually I focus on the early, like birth to 3, like in their homes, but then the early elementary, usually through middle school. And they have to qualify for physical therapy. It has to affect their educational needs. So I work with them to implement any PT intervention that's needed so they can profit from their educational program. A lot of that does include exercise, usually specific exercises so they can learn functional skills. Their goal is that they're going to be able to climb stairs on their own, or participate with their peers in a PE class, or even getting class to class is a challenge for some of my students. So those are the kind of things I focus on.
The students who are referred to you, are they typically referred by their teachers, by their parents? How does it come about that you even see the students?
Many of my students start from when they're young. They maybe had some delays in their motor skills, and then they were assessed, qualified, started physical therapy a lot of times before they're in preschool. And then at 3, they come to our school and get services there through to the time either they have plateaued, and they're on a home program, like doing things on their own, or they just do it as with their paraprofessionals at school.
Is there something specific about a child learning how to bike and starting off with these balance bikes, which are the no pedal bikes, that is particularly conducive to helping a child who already has some motor developmental issues overcome them? Is there, again, we were talking a little bit before versus say having the child swim or having the child do other exercises. There's something you like about bicycling for these kids?
Yes, I've especially the physical things I see, they get their balance, they get challenged by getting even on and off the bike is sometimes something that that challenges them. And they get so excited when they are able to achieve some of the tasks on the bike. But what I see the most is their social aspect of it. They can do it with their classmates, they can do it with their families, and they benefit from that so much. Especially in this society where we're plugged in all the time, that if they're out being physical, and I think that's such a confidence builder and such a mental aspect to it also.
Good. I'm going to go to Kent Jacobs next. Kent, how you doing today?
I am doing very well. Thanks, Dean.
Now listen, your official title is you're a bicycle designer and you're product manager at Strider Sports International. But I'd like to give you the honorary title of Professor Jacobs, because in fact you get a lot of the credit for inventing the bicycles that are being used in the All Kids Bike program to help kids. These were not simply small adult bikes that you came up with. You spent a decent amount of time, you can tell us a little bit about it, trying to understand the physiology of young children, toddlers up to kindergarten, to understand what a bike designed specifically to help them learn bicycling, what it should look like. Tell us a little bit about the development process and why the bikes that we're using in the All Kids Bike program are, again, not just small versions of their older siblings' bikes or of their parents' bikes.
Sure. The conventional kids bike design approach is typically sizing that down from an adult. They are maybe even taking components from an adult bike and just getting it small enough to kind of be in that size range of the kids that are using it. We took an opposite approach, and really our number one goal with the All Kids Bike was to get the kids pedaling as soon as possible. That was our measure of success. So to do that, we really start from the ground up. And just like our 12-inch balance bike design, what is the minimal amount of things that you need on that bike to make that possible, pedaling as soon as possible. So really looking at function for that child, which we think ultimately comes down to fit. So it's got to fit the child first. They've got to be comfortable on it. And then that leads to that ability to function. So, really short cranks, really thin cranks. I mean, a 3-year-old is not very big. And then you look at the age range that we're looking at, 3 to 7 years old too. And while they're not growing as a percentage as much as they did, say, from 18 months to 3 years or 5 years old, 3 to 7 is still a very large percentage growth period. So a lot of adjustability on the bike, seat heights, handlebars, all of those things were looked at. We also knew that kids in that age range were not necessarily able to balance or ride a bike yet. They're not coming into it already riding, and then, okay, now we're going to add the pedal element. So we made it a 2-in-1 design. So it starts as that, pedal-less bike that we've talked about, which enables them to learn the balance, learn how it steers. And of course, all of this is without training wheels. There's no training wheels involved in any of this. And that is the key. So they learn that balance.
But why is that, why is that important? In other words, training wheels on some level, your belief is, I think, actually hinder the child's ability to develop his or her own balance and coordination. Is that correct?
Well, the root of that is that instead of the child balancing the bike, now you've got this thing attached to it that's really the bike is balancing itself. They're not being exposed to any of those physiological things, or the things that Dr. Shim talked about in catching themselves on one side or the other. And each time you do that, your body is reacting and learning, feeling how that works and reprogramming, just like Dr. Shim mentioned. So that's the root of that. And then you get into the way that a bicycle actually handles and turns. So a lot of people don't understand that when you turn a bike to the right, you actually counter steer and turn to the left first, and then it falls, and then you turn back into that turn. Now, when you make that same turn on a tricycle or a training wheel bike, they're essentially the same thing. To turn right, you turn right. Well, now you've just done the exact opposite action that you will need to do when you're actually riding a bike.
Okay. So, by the way, I like the fact that when you were turning right, you were turning right, and you were turning left. It was kind of like the panel in 4D, something along those lines. And I can see the other panelists who are not on screen right now, and they were all doing this too. You just had everybody doing that. So, Dr. Anderson, let me come back to you for a minute. I have a truly lay understanding of how all of this works. What I have told people for years in talking about the no pedal bikes and the advantages of them is this, is that a child, the child can figure out, a young child, 18 months old, 24 months old, 36 months old, etc., can figure out, working on a balanced bike, how to balance long before his or her muscle strength comes in or developed enough to pedal a bike. And I think one of the advantages of the kind of bikes that we're using in All Kids Bike is that we see kids who get their balance first on a no pedal bike, and then when their muscles come in, when they have the physical ability to really pedal a bike, they can just get on a bike and go, and no more mom and dad having to chase behind them and hold the seat, and certainly no more training wheels. But what is the developmental stage of children? Am I correct that young children can learn balance before they have the muscle strength to push a bike forward?
So I think there might be a couple of factors. One is that developmentally, and I know that Cindy and Andrew can talk about this as well. So developmentally, what kids are doing very early on is they're practicing their righting and balance reactions. It starts with head control, being able to lift the head up off of the floor or up off of mom or dad's shoulder. And then it goes to trunk control, and then we have pelvic control. So there's a lot of challenges to the multiple systems that go into balance. That piece then is juxtaposed against the size of the child and how rapidly he or she is growing and needing to generate force against that body weight. So there's that variable that comes into play as well. I think that balancing and seeing kids on a pedal-less bike demonstrates that movement and that the ability to kind of check yourself and right yourself, as Andrew was saying, to balance yourself, with that speed component is very reinforcing, even from like a vestibular input standpoint. So that's helpful. The next thing is that, you know, Strider's design is brilliant, and then the pedal adaptation is just so spot on, because
Wait a minute, Kent. I want people to see Kent. Kent, are you there? Say something.
Yes, I'm here.
He's got a grin, you know, he's got a grin on his face. Here, Dr. Anderson is talking about how brilliant the design is. Okay, Kent, you can go away again. Please continue, Dr. Anderson.
Yeah, so it's so brilliant because in my experience, in having looked at children try to get on their bike that mom and dad bought from, you know, a toy store, the positioning did not put kids an advantage of being able to actually pedal. The alignment of the pedal to the seat was just all off. And I'm sure what Cindy will be able to contribute in a minute is that with kids with developmental disability, they have to have every possible advantage to make that work. And what I think that the Strider design, going from balancing to now the pedal adaptation to the bike, is design-wise puts them at that advantage of every advantage to take the balance and now use the strength that they have developed in order to be able to cycle.
Awesome. So Cindy, I do want to throw this over to you, but Dr. Shim, I also want to tell you that what I'd like you to also weigh in on is how, if whatever insight you might have as to how some of these same principles are helping adults who are struggling with balance, coordination, etc. And Cindy, we could do, and we may do, an entire panel on working with special needs children. But let's just talk about what your experience is in giving kids using these bikes to get kids who probably without this program, without All Kids Bike, without the designs that Kent and his colleagues created for All Kids Bike, might never learn to bike.
Well, some of my students, honestly, biking as traditional biking on a regular bike is never going to be an option for them because of their challenge, balance, and some other motor planning issues they have. So that's why the Strider bike works so perfect for them. Even up through middle school, they are doing an activity that they can do it successfully at pretty much a level of a lot of their peers. And, you know, there some especially this All Kids Bike with the kindergartners, so many even just children without special needs or any delays in their motor skills can't pedal a bike. I mean, they're actually fearful of getting on and starting that. And so to have that confidence, along with a special needs child in the same classroom, being able to do the same skill and be successful at it is, I guess, the most positive thing that I see with these, along with their families. Some of their families, it's very important for them, for their child to be able to go with them and not be limited.
Absolutely, kids love that. Dr. Shim, let me ask you again, what I would think is, I don't know whether it's scientific or whether it is just, you know, sort of a common urban myth, but the notion that once you learn to bike, you always know how to bike, so if you, for example, as a child, if you learn to bike and then you're away for 20 years from biking, that you can come back, get on a bike and bike. Is there truth? Is there science behind that, or is that myth?
Unfortunately, Dean, I cringe, and I'll try not to physically cringe in front of you, where I have undergraduate students and general population people who will use that term, which we hear on infomercials as well as any public venue, of muscle memory. I cringe with that term because honestly, there is no such thing as muscle memory. Dean, I mean, just think about that in a pragmatic sense. Your muscles don't have memory cells. and I mean, that, you know, sounds like a great method of explaining why things happen, but they don't. I mean, we do have motor learning, but that incorporates the higher activity of the brain, sending the right impulses to the skeletal muscles, but that takes reinforcement. I don't want to ask for any sympathy, but it took several years for me to get this publication with the Strider bike and the autism study done, and horrible cheap plug, but it just got published online today, and it goes hard copy next month through the Advances in Neurodevelopmental Disorders. So sorry for that plug, Dean.
Wait. We're friends here. Everybody's friends. So tell us what journal it's published in.
Advances in Neurodevelopmental Disorders.
Say that 3 times real quickly.
Yeah, I'm in trouble if you do that.
Now,
and it's not even cocktail hour, so no, I mean, so we're going to talk about that later on.
And the study that you just had published today, again, congratulations,
Thank you.
Was really not about children, but if I'm correct, it was sort of a dotted line between the research you started in 2012. Is that correct? Or
well, it actually was with children, Dean. Okay. It was on autistic children, and by 2015, Strider reached out to me and said that they were building this special needs bike, and they were asking me to find a population in special needs and seeing if this bike would be effective. And I let the folks know, and at that time, Kyla Wright was my contact instead of certain other employees at Strider International in Rapid City. And I said, it's not my expertise, it's not my area of comfort. However, it was something that colleagues, and it was meant to be, Dean, because once the research team got formulated with 2 developmental psychology experts out of the University of Nebraska, we had an autism center that donated the time and the facility, and then the grad students and the undergraduate students, as well as the school district in Sioux City, Iowa. It all came together, and it was meant to be. But getting back with the original question for you, Dean, is about 3.5 months later, I was in a car accident, and long story short, I had to learn how to walk again. And let's talk about this concept of muscle memory. I mean, I should have been able to get off that hospital bed, Dean, and be able to say, I know how to walk.
Right.
I couldn't. And it was one of the things where it gave me a greater appreciation, even though at that time I was faculty in a DPT program. It gave me greater faculty for people like Cindy, as well as occupational therapists who had to work with me for a month on relearning how to do these simple skills that we just take for granted, Dean.
Okay, so bear with me, Dr. Shim. Dr. Anderson, let me come back to you. One is, why is the myth, if it's a myth, so prevalent that if you learn how to bike as a child, you'll never forget? And 2 is, assuming that it is actually more myth than reality, as Dr. Shim points out, what are the lifelong benefits that you detect when children begin bicycling early and presumably stick with it?
Okay, I think, so the myth part, you know, Dr. Shim was definitely onto something. It's not memory, it's kind of a motor memory or a motor control, and that requires the brain. And following an injury, whether it is a musculoskeletal injury or it involves even a minor head injury, a minor brain injury, those circuits get all, you know, discombobulated, and there is time needing to relearn movements and relearn how, or an opportunity to have a reintegration of all of the systems that allow you to move and allow you to balance. So I think that when we're talking about a normal nervous system and a normal musculoskeletal system, people are going to be able to retain their ability to bicycle and walk even if they don't practice it very much. But then you have the aging, darn those aging changes that occur in everyone almost no matter what you do. So you are losing some capacity to build strength. You are not build strength, but reach your maximum strength. You are losing flexibility. You are losing some of the proprioceptors as we age. So what happens as we get older is as we keep practicing those activities, we know we can maintain those activities. So we keep walking, we keep biking, we're able to keep biking even into our older years. We may not do it as proficiently, but we're still able to do it. So the long-term benefit for bike riding is really the ability to stay physically active. And as Cindy mentioned, there's that huge social component to things. And if you think about it, when children are first developing in their first year, their movement is extremely powerful for them to be able to explore the environment. Biking for kids and for adults also gives them that ability to explore their environment. I mean, even not just within their community that may be 1 mile square, but way beyond that, and think about all the learning and all the benefit that comes from those kinds of experiences.
Terrific. Cindy, in the school system, even the children who maybe do not need a physical therapist, what do you see, just firsthand knowledge of children who at the kindergarten, first grade level begin bicycling, what it means for them when they get to 5th grade, what it means to them even beyond that? What do you see as the benefits later on in childhood and adolescence of starting early?
Well, I think, the benefit is just being active, especially if it's something they enjoy. They're using their cardiovascular system, along with the benefits of that, not gaining weight. I have some students that actually have a tough time mobilizing within in the school from class to class because of their issues with not being active, obesity, usually not balance issues, but usually that the issue of just not being the endurance to get from one point to another at a speed that their classmates are going. And so when it comes to the bicycling, they're obviously being active, and they're doing it for a longer amount of time. The PE class, I don't know if you've ever been in an elementary school, but a lot of times they're sitting, listening directions on the game, what they're going to do. The first day, maybe on the Strider bikes, they have to go through some rules and instruction and idea, but usually it's, okay, grab your bikes, here we go. And they are going around the gym the whole PE class. So I see the benefit of that is they're active for a longer amount of time. And always the plug for unplugging, they're not able to be distracted. They have to focus on what they're doing. And that's such a mental component with that too.
Kent, Dr. Shim, Dr. Anderson, they work in an academic environment where there are control groups and there are studies, and then there are peer reviews and things along those lines. I've been to your lab. It looks like a mad scientist garage. But the truth is, tell me a little bit about iterations of the bike that's now involved in All Kids Bike. In other words, I think you have adjusted it in part by seeing how it works in the real world.
Absolutely. One thing I would add to Cindy's comments there too is confidence. These are life milestones for these kids. Learning to ride a bike is really a milestone. And so when they've accomplished that, regardless of, how old or what their, physical challenge or mental challenges are, confidence is a huge lifelong booster. As far as the design of the bike and the iterations, actually, Dr. Anderson even mentioned how it fits better. And we took a great deal of time studying anthropometric data, and that's the measurements of children. So you've got, you usually think of height and weight. Well, we went height, and then you've got arm lengths, and you've got upper arm lengths, and here to here lengths, and leg length, total length, length to knee. you know, all of these things as we iterated through. And we actually took what I would call adult bicycling efficiency factors. There's something called knee over pedal spindle, the alignment of your knee as the cranks, you know, come around and you're in your main power position. How do we get that lined up? I mean, that's the standard for biking efficiently for professionals. So we applied that to the bike. So in using that anthropometric data, you know, you take your 3-year-old and you go all the way up to 7 and they're taller, longer. This gets back to the fit of the bike as well. We were able to get the seat angles right, get the wheelbase correct, you know, position the handlebars, all of those things, iterate those and find components that would work for that goal of pedaling, using that anthropometric data and lining that all up. I've got a really great sketch of all of this, all these kids that I built in 2 dimensions and fit to the bike and raised the seat and lowered it. So we were doing that, you know, in the virtual world. And then we also had, I think it was at least 30 kids come in and test a few of the iterations of the bike. And that's where we found a lot of the advantages in the thinner pedals. You know, you've got the pedals on there, but it's got what we would call dual propulsion. So once you've taken the footrest off and put that pedal kit on, you're not stuck in, oh, now I have to pedal. Well, maybe I'm not ready yet. Well, no, you can still stride, you know, walk around those pedals, get your momentum going, and then try the pedals. So lots of different features in that bike were driven by not only the study, you know, the virtual study that we did, but lots of kids coming in. And we knew it was working when I started accusing the parents of these kids of, no, they pedaled the bike before, right? Surely they pedaled the bike before. Is the grandma's house something? Come on, tell me, what is it? You guys can't be being honest with us. They were learning to pedal so fast. I mean, they were just getting on, yep, you know how to balance. Okay, now we're going to pedal, done. So that was great.
Anderson, do you think we could arrange with Rutgers to give Kent an honorary degree? I mean, it sounds like, it does sound like it's that this bicycle that we're using for All Kids Bike is the kind of thing that was developed in a academic setting to specifically cater to kids. And forget the fact that it was developed in a for-profit environment. All Kids Bike is a non-profit program. What do you think, Doctor?
Yeah, I'll see what I can do. You know, it's a tough bill to sell to our Board of Regents for an honorary degree, but I think you're right, Dean, because you know what we kind of say in our world is about body scaling. So that idea is that kids who are playing pee-wee soccer, they play with a size 3 or 4 ball, because we know that we want them to develop good foot skills. But if they play with a regular size soccer ball, they're going to be developing habits that are not going to help them with a good trajectory of proficiency. You know, they'll stay a beginner kicker rather than a proficient kicker because the equipment just isn't right. And then we see that happening with the size of the baseball glove. You know, there's this body scaling of equipment for proficiency and also for safety. And, you know, Strider kind of said, we got to get kids on bikes. And so we have to develop the right product. We have to take into account the size and the mechanics of this activity of biking. And they developed a product that is just so enabling on children of, you know, of different ages, of different abilities to be able to bike.
Terrific. Well, we'll see if we can get that conferred on Kent, but at least this panel can. Kent, I want to come to you one more time, and then we'll go to each of our panelists for one final question or set of comments. But for you, Kent, I have seen videos, I haven't seen it with my own 2 eyes, I think you have, of various kids who doctors said would never learn how to bike, whose parents in some ways never believed their kids would learn how to bike. These are older kids, not kindergartners so much, who learn how to bike. And I have seen the glowing look in their eyes and in their face. But tell us a little bit about how the same principles that go into the all kids bike, kindergarten bike, have really helped kids that people thought were lost causes when it came to bicycling bike.
Sure. I think one of the keys of balance bikes in general, but especially for that group, that you're talking about, that's challenged, whatever special needs, something there has delayed, and or they just didn't they didn't put their butt on a bike till they were 20 years old or whatever, is that it's a weight-bearing device, if you will. So you're putting your butt on the seat, and the strength required to balance is actually very little if you're at the balance point. I mean, you can just barely be touching the ground. So, you've got to, if you're ever going to bike without training wheels or without 4 wheels or 3, you've got to be exposed to that balance, or have to balance, the back and forth that Dr. Shim talked about again. So what that enables them to do is feel that balance, and feel what it takes to balance in a very progressive manner. So that you can actually put all of your weight on the seat and lift your legs up, and you're balanced for a little bit. And then you're putting your feet down. So you take that aspect, even just stationary. Now you start walking a little bit, with it, and just moving. And each of those steps is another one of those, balance points. And so it's that progression. One of the other things about training wheels that doesn't work is that you either have them or you don't. I mean, that's here to here. You're just instant. You got to balance now. Oh, wow, I've never done anything related to balance because the bike's been balancing for me. So this idea of progressing up to more and more balance. So at first, they might not even sit on the seat. They might just be walking, and there's this thing they're kind of holding up, but they're still feeling that as that handlebar, tilts back and forth. Oh, well, that's harder to hold up. That's harder to hold up. Oh, it's easy in the middle. And it just, that's working in the brain physiologically. So for anyone that's learning to balance, any age, and ride on a bike, that's going to be a really easy progression. And the good thing is you don't have to, you progress at your own pace. You don't have to instantly be riding. And so that's where we get that beautiful moment. And I haven't been at the events, but I know Special Olympics, we had an adventure zone set up. You get these families where they've been told that, and you start talking to the parent. Well, we've already got, a person over here getting the child fit to the bike, and we're talking to them about how it works and everything. And they're, but we've been told they'll never be able to do it. And suddenly they look over, and their child has a helmet on, and they're riding a bike around our adventure zone. And it's tears all around. And that's the cry of joy. I mean, it's just nothing short of amazing. And then again, back to that confidence point, they're going, oh my gosh, I'm doing it. And the family's going, oh my gosh. I mean, it's an absolutely pivotal moment in that person's life.
Cindy, even for children who are not challenged physically or mentally, the first time that they are able to get on a pedal bike and go off on their own is really quite a developmental milestone, isn't it?
Yes. They're, like I said, there's even my children that are my students that are in a regular ed physical education class, there's other students that are also struggling with those first balance, points of riding the Strider bike. And so they do deal with that. And I specifically think of a middle school student I work with, and he had a brain injury at birth. And so very asymmetrical. One side of his body is much weaker than the other. And the Strider bike demands that you use both sides. You can't just let one side sit there, and you're going to run into the wall in the hallway at the school or something. And it has really forced him to learn some symmetry and his center of gravity, and making that one side be the same as his peers. And along with other kids, they have to push with one leg and then the other at some point pretty repetitively at a pretty good pace to have a lot more success with it, which is good for the other, regular ed children too.
Cindy, my final question for you is really pertains to other PTs and other elementary schools who at this point may not be using bicycling as a tool. First of all, I don't even know if that's true. I mean, is it, does it go hand in hand if you're a elementary school physical therapist that you're probably trying to use bicycles?
Well, more recently, especially with the All Bikes program, it has been probably a goal for some of the physical therapists, because it is something that affects school. Because their classmates are doing it at school and also learning that skill, that it is being demanded, they're expecting your any child that has physical therapy as their goal that they could do that. I sometimes actually use it as a reward too, if they, with the autism study, I don't know if they found anything with that, but it is something that they enjoy doing to the point where they will work on the skills that they don't enjoy so much if the reward is that they can go and use this.
I'll put in the whole panel effectively is a plug for All Kids Bike, keeping in mind that it is a nonprofit program that the schools don't have to spend any money on. But I'll put in an additional plug that says that if somebody watching this is a physical therapist and their school does not already participate in All Kids Bike, it probably makes some sense to go to the administration and say, hey, we really ought to get involved in this program, because it not only will help kids in the mainstream, but it will help kids who need physical therapy. So thank you for that. Andrew, I'm going to come to you, and then we'll close out with Dr. Anderson again. Dr. Shim, I interviewed for the psychology of early childhood biking panel, a sibling to this panel, a professor in Denmark, Dr. Professor Nels Eglund, and he was involved in a Danish study of 25,000 kids and what difference it made whether they walked and biked to school versus whether they were driven to school. And he saw some really interesting, surprising actually, because it wasn't what they were looking for. Saw some interesting results talking about the real benefits of exercise on the way to school. And then I asked him the question, which is what I think I want to ask you, which is, well, what follow-up research would you like to do if you could do it? And in fact, for him, he was saying that they didn't look closely enough at the socioeconomic background of the children who were involved in the study, and he thought there was need for further research. Let me ask you, Dr. Shim, what do you see as the next frontier, both of your research and of research that you would like or think would be helpful in general to give us all a better understanding of the benefits of childhood bicycling?
Well, let's go back to the premise about how bicycling should be a lifelong activity. And based upon that concept, this is the reason why currently right now we are starting in about 2 weeks a Parkinson's study looking at the Strider adult version bikes, and we're seeing if somehow a similar curriculum could improve balance scores, walking gait methods, as well as getting our occupational therapy professors and students involved there too, looking at other aspects of some other forms of therapy to see if a modification in the handlebars, looking at grip strength, if those things, which looking at this degenerative type disease could be helpful in terms of quality of life, as well as just enjoyment and having the ability to have some kind of physical fitness without being detrimental towards looking at the long-term disease conceptualizing upon their life. So that's something that we are looking at right now, and hopefully again by December I'll be able to give you some data on that to see where that goes. But you know, we're always looking at a lot of unknown things. Just to answer quickly, well, it's not really a question, but in terms of Kent's response, when he's going over the concepts of feeling, we call that proprioception. And that's another area that we look at here too, with a lot of our studies, thinking what are some outside variables that are contributing to balance, just besides just the vision. You know, the mechanical receptors in muscle spindles, Golgi tendons, the vestibular apparatuses, things of that sort also play a role with improving balance with children on the bicycles.
Awesome. Dr. Anderson, we'll give you the final word on this panel. What do you see as the next frontier, either for research that would shed additional light on children and adolescents, or as Dr. Shim is doing, looking at adults, special cases of adults, etc.?
All right, I think Dr. Shim's work is really interesting, and because what we know is that in Parkinsonism, that increasing physical activity so that they reach a moderate intensity of physical activity can demonstrate better cognitive and motor control. The challenge is that people with Parkinsonism have difficulty moving. So how do you get them to reach moderate intensity of physical activity? And biking, striding may be a way for them to be able to do that. So I would look to, you know, in the future, see different applications of biking in ways that people are increasing their physical activity to reach that moderate intensity, and then looking at different health benefits that come from that, also applied in different patient populations. So we hear the example in Parkinsonism and in autism, and perhaps there are patient populations well beyond the well healthy or the well elderly population that can benefit from, you know, the application of striding and biking.
Awesome. So I think we're going to wrap it up at this point. I wish I could show each of you on the camera, but the way our technology works, I really can't. I can tell our viewing audience that everybody is still here. Everybody seems to be awake, alert, maybe even smiling. So that is certainly nice. I'm the layperson. I really am the layperson, the uneducated when it comes to science and physiology person on the panel. I guess I would conclude by saying that what I take away from this session is that there is a lot of established research and clinical experience that suggests the benefits, the physiological benefits of young kids on bikes, and how that could apply to them. The same principles could apply well into old age under the right circumstances. And I think we'll leave it at that. So thank you, panelists, Dr. Ellen Anderson, Dr. Andrew Shim, Cindy Ireland, and Professor Kent Jacobs. It's been terrific. Thank you. Dr. Monteiro, thank you for taking the time to be with us on this panel.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I appreciate it.
So you are a pediatrician and you work in a community health center. Tell us a little bit about that health center, what kind of patients come there, and specifically what kind of patients you see on a regular basis.
Okay. I work in a community-based health center in a city called New Bedford in Massachusetts. The majority of our patients are born outside of the United States, or a very large proportion of them. Many have recently arrived to the US by way of lots of different travel. And we also see a large proportion of people who are born and raised in our community as well. The majority of our population is Medicaid based. And so we do see a lot of variety in terms of our patient population.
You've been there just a little bit over 3 years, is that correct?
That's correct. I started it 3 years ago.
And what age do you start seeing little kids? At infants, at birth? What age do you start seeing kids? Yeah.
So we start seeing the babies as soon as they have left the hospital. So usually around like 2 to 4 days old is the first time that we'll see them. And then we follow them up until usually around the age of 18 to 20 years old, depending on each individual child.
And you were, before you came to the New Bedford Community Health Center, you were, what, a resident physician in pediatrics? Is that what it was?
That's correct. I did my residency in pediatrics for 3 years before starting.
In theory, maybe the oldest infant that you treated when you were a resident is maybe now 6 or 7 years old?
That's true, yes.
If that was an infant. So you have some experience in seeing that, but obviously kids who come to you when they're 6, maybe now are 13, whatever it happens to be. So the topic of this panel is the physiology of early childhood biking, and it's okay to extend it from biking to exercise. And trying to get a clinician's point of view. You also have your own 2.5-year-old who's ready to bike soon. So we'll talk a little bit about her in a minute. But from a clinician's point of view, talk a little bit about the importance, what you believe is the importance of exercise, and sort of what age should children start doing planned exercise, like biking, like swimming, like soccer teams, things along those lines.
So in my opinion, it's always important to introduce activity as early as possible. I think that can start in a lot of different ways, even from when the children are just a few months old. There are ways that families can interact with their children, even if it's just as simple as doing something as tummy time. But a lot of the activity that the recommendations that I tend to make is trying to limit screen time from as young as possible. Because at least in my experience, and I think there's also evidence for this as well, the more that you are able to limit the screen time, the more that kids are going to find other ways to entertain themselves. And a lot of times that's just by them being active and having fun and playing and creating, imaginary games and things like that. So I think that screen time limitation is extremely important. And as far as it goes with structured activities, swimming, biking, what have you, I think that you just kind of have to gauge where each individual child is at. Things like swimming tend to be activities that are able to be introduced a little bit younger by way of like a parent-child class. Many of the local YMCAs and things like that have parent-child classes where just an introduction to water and movement in the water and things like that can be started as young as about 6 to 9 months old. And then as the kids are able to move around and propel themselves a little bit more, you kind of get into using their little push carts and things like that. And as they get more able to walk and run on their own, introducing kind of like things with balls or little bicycles and mobility assist kind of activities, which can transition into things like bicycling as they get older.
So are you seeing, we read a lot of news reports about kids in an obesity epidemic. Do you see that in the clinic? Are you seeing kids who are young kids? We're talking, let's say, younger than first grade, from birth to first grade. Are you, at that age, are you seeing a lot of kids who already have problems with obesity?
Most definitely. Unfortunately, it is something that we see on a daily basis. I often identify it in the very early years, and a lot of times it's within an entire family. You'll see multiple family members who have issues with obesity, and those kind of habits tend to transfer into the child as well as they're continuing to grow. If you grow up in a family where other people tend to overeat or have weight-related issues, it's easier for that child to certainly have similar habits that would predispose them to having obesity issues. But I tend to follow my children for their weights between every 3 to 4 months. So I'll see them for their physicals and then follow them about every 3 months during the year to continue to track their growth and development, and seeing how they're tracking with their weights as well, which is a big issue that we continue to follow here.
When I read just the general media, not the medical literature, there seems to be a consensus that says exercise is great, but it's really not necessarily effective when it comes to losing weight. That even if you do a lot of adult exercise, the calories you burn don't necessarily offset what you consume if you're still consuming a lot of junk. Now, let's talk about kids, like the kids you've been describing a little bit. If they come from a family where their parents or older siblings are already obese or showing signs of obesity, can regular childhood exercise make enough of a difference to get off of that path?
I think that childhood activity and exercise is a very important part of the equation. I also think that getting the entire family on board is very important, because we see that families that are more invested in terms of multiple members taking an interest in increasing activities and seeking healthier habits can create a better environment for the child to continue to grow and maintain healthy habits as they continue to grow into their teen years and adult years.
So our nonprofit movement is called All Kids Bike, but it really should be All Family Members Bike, right? Because
yes, that would be wonderful.
It would be most helpful for kids. So I have 2 young adult kids. You have a 2.5-year-old. How old will she be when she enters kindergarten?
So she'll be about 5 years old when she enters kindergarten.
So for about 5-year-olds, I assume some may be just a little shy and some may be a little bit older. What is your sense as to their muscular coordination, balance abilities to learn how to bike?
So it varies from one child to another, but I think that especially in the kind of pre-K kindergarten age range, that they're definitely primed and ready to learn that type of coordination. They're so eager to learn different skills, and their balance can be quite good. And learning the coordination of, all right, if I can get my legs to do this and I can get my hands to do this, I can go in this direction together, is something that they're definitely capable of, and just takes a little bit of practice to hone it.
So we know at least for adults, we know that bicycling as a regular exercise has great cardiovascular benefits. It does have muscle benefits, coordination benefits, and maybe I want to talk about this too, maybe immunological benefits. Do they accrue to a child who is 5 or 6 years old and is regularly on a bike or regularly swimming or playing soccer? Can you tell biologically, if you will, that a child who is active has better, I don't know what you look for in children, with better blood pressure, better blood sugar, better eye-hand coordination? I mean, I think when we used to take our kids to the pediatrician, they would test them a little bit for their motor coordination.
Yes, and so, we're always tracking motor coordination and general health and well-being from one year to the next. And when children are younger, they're also checked more frequently for motor milestones, for language milestones, for social milestones. And so we continue to follow kids throughout their entire lives, tracking these kind of things. The children who are more fit and tend to be less sedentary also tend to have less issues with obesity. And, obesity isn't just a single factor. It's not going to be, oh, you're active, so that automatically means that you can't become obese. Certainly food consumption and their genetic components and cultural components that also play into everybody's predisposition to different conditions, but we do tend to notice that the more active you are, the healthier you are, and conditions like high blood pressure and diabetes and issues with sugar control can be seen in young people as young as, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. And so unfortunately, we do see very young people with the blood pressures that are supposed to be in the adult ranges. And so it's things that we have to track very closely, unfortunately, from a young age in many children. So increased activity can be positive association with protective kind of factors.
And talk about the typical childhood illnesses. Probably top of the list are colds and sore throats, maybe flu, some of the other childhood illnesses. Is there from a clinical perspective, again, we're saying that you haven't done research on thousands of kids, although you probably have seen a large number of kids. Do you see immunological improvement in kids who are active at a young age?
As far as activity as a direct correlation with the occurrence of illness, I'm not sure about all the regular common coughs and colds. I think that's more to do with your body hasn't encountered a lot of these illnesses, and so you will tend to suffer them more when you're young. But in general, more long-term consequences with some of the more chronic illnesses is where I tend to make the association of activity being a protective factor against health conditions like diabetes and things like that.
So Dr. Monteiro, I think I only want to ask you 2 more questions. And of course, if there's anything we didn't cover, I'd welcome you to cover it. One is, again, you have your own 2.5-year-old daughter that you are either already exposing to childhood bicycling or intend to. Tell us a little bit about her and maybe your enthusiasm, not as a pediatrician, but as a mom to see her get on a bicycle.
Oh yeah, well, she is loving biking. We've started when she was very young and she couldn't propel herself. We started by taking her on bike rides with us. We had a little child seat, and now she's more enthusiastic about like, let me do it myself. And she has a little bike that she's working on her coordination and balance to try to figure out the mechanics of like getting herself around. It's pretty fun to get to see her do that. In my opinion, she's awesome and an amazing little human being, which I hope all parents think of their own children. But it's great to be able to see her grow and have that kind of sense of confidence and independence that you kind of get as you build skills. And it's good to get to see that firsthand in my own child, and then get to share those experiences with my patients and encourage them to keep their kids and keep themselves active as well.
So you tell parents who come in, make sure your child gets plenty of sleep and eats right and gets exercise, I assume.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely part of the recommendations that we give on a daily basis.
So not every family unit is sort of television, mother knows best, father knows best. There are a lot of kids out there that don't have stable homes, or have stable homes, but parents who are not well educated. And so to some degree then, for kids like that, it may fall to the school systems to look out after them. And All Kids Bike is using the schools as a vehicle to try to teach all kindergartners, regardless of what neighborhood they live in, what their ethnicity is, any of those things. We just want to put bikes into kindergartens and make it part of the early childhood curriculum, like reading, writing, and arithmetic. And I thought maybe just in conclusion, it might be helpful. We're going to have teachers and principals listening to this who may actually have more influence over children sometimes than their parents do. Well-meaning parents, but maybe not knowledgeable, and maybe just what you might tell a teacher or a principal about the importance and what, your support. Obviously, you support the idea of bringing a program like this into their schools.
I think that if there's the opportunity to have a program like this, it's so wonderful for children. For one, we know that many children, unfortunately, don't have a lot of activity outside of their school hours. And so based on the obesity epidemic that we do have in this country, as well as just wanting kids to have fun and be able to be active. I think it's so important to involve programs such as this and any other form of physical activity if possible in the daily routines that children are exposed to. We know that a lot of families, the parents, especially in our area, are working very long hours. They get home and they only have enough time to feed the kids and try to make sure that homework is done and get those kids to bed and up in the morning before they all have to be going to school. So certainly the time that they spend at school is usually the majority of children's waking hours. And the more positive experiences and exposures that they can have to healthy habits and creating a level of independence, like when they're learning to bike, they have such a feeling of accomplishment. It's one of those kind of experience where most adults can recall the time that they learned to bike or when they could swim independently. And those are things that kind of carry through your entire life. Like if you can think of it yourself, I can remember the day that I first learned to bike independently, and that kind of sense of, wow, look at me, I feel so strong, I feel so cool, kind of thing. And we want all kids to be able to have those experiences. And unfortunately, outside of school, not all kids would be able to be afforded that kind of an experience. And I think that growing on a personal level and personal confidence and strength and feeling like you have the ability to conquer challenges is something important for children to be able to feel as they continue to grow and move forward in their life in many different facets of their growth. And having programs like this is a great way for them to work towards having, good goals and tackling challenges in the future as well, and staying healthy as well and being active.
And I didn't rehearse you, is that correct?
That is so true. Unprompted, I promise.
Anything we didn't cover that you would like to say? Have we done it?
I think you guys are doing a great job. I sincerely hope that sometime we can get some of the bikes over in some of our local schools. So I'm going to try to communicate with our local schools more about this.
We will. You have a pledge. We will. I can't tell you it's going to be tomorrow, but our goal is to blanket the country. And right now we're doing schools, but I do imagine at some point it may be clinics or other places too. Any place we can reach kids, because our philosophy is that in so many ways, physiologically, we also have a panel on the psychology, so socialization and self-confidence, etc. We have an expert panel on that. It's helpful. Okay, Dr. Monteiro, thank you for being with us. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Have a great day. Thank you.